Our tariffs will remain in place until the U.S. tariffs are withdrawn, and not a moment sooner.
These tariffs went into effect at midnight on Tuesday, March 4th, sending U.S. markets into a dramatic sell-off. Steel and aluminum imports will also be subject to a levy.
While the United States remains entangled in global trade disputes, Canada has quietly executed what analysts are calling a European trade offensive that threatens to undermine decades of American economic dominance. The numbers are staggering: a 66% increase in Canada-EU trade since 2017, creating a $119 billion relationship that's rapidly expanding.
It's unclear which tariffs will last. Trump has since altered, paused, or canceled some of the tariffs, but the threat of the tariffs has prompted a strong response from Canadian leadership.
What's truly unprecedented is how this trade shift is restructuring power dynamics within NATO itself. European nations, increasingly wary of American trade unpredictability, are systematically diversifying their supply chains away from US businesses toward Canadian alternatives. This video reveals the calculated strategy behind Canada's moves and what it means for American economic influence on the world stage.
Canada announced retaliatory tariffs, including a 25% tariff on $30 billion worth of U.S. goods on March 4th, with an additional 25% tariff on over $20 billion in U.S. imports that took effect on Thursday, March 13th.
While Washington grapples with a multitude of trade conflicts across multiple fronts, Canada has quietly orchestrated a sophisticated European trade strategy that's beginning to reshape the economic landscape across the Atlantic. The cornerstone of this strategy, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, has provided Canada with unprecedented access to European markets since its implementation in 2017. This agreement wasn't merely a standard trade deal. It represented Canada's calculated first move in a longer-term vision to position itself as Europe's preferred North American trading partner. European businesses, frustrated by the unpredictability of American trade policies over recent years, have begun methodically diversifying their supply chains. This shift isn't happening by accident. Canadian trade officials have strategically pitched their nation as offering three distinct advantages that American suppliers cannot currently match: competitive pricing structures that remain stable over time, significantly fewer regulatory trade restrictions, and perhaps most crucially, a relationship free from the political weaponization that has characterized recent American trade policy. The timing of Canada's European trade offensive couldn't be more opportune. Just as Washington implemented substantial tariffs on European imports, including a 25% increase on EU automobiles, Canada presented itself as a reliable alternative. This stark contrast in approach has resonated with European manufacturers seeking stability in their supply networks. Canadian officials have been particularly effective in highlighting their country's commitment to rules-based trade, directly contrasting with what many European businesses perceive as increasingly arbitrary American trade decisions. Energy security has emerged as the cornerstone of Canada's strategic approach, with European nations actively seeking to diversify their energy sources amid volatile global markets. Canadian natural gas and renewable energy technologies have attracted significant interest. European energy ministers have increasingly visited Ottawa rather than Washington when discussing long-term energy partnerships, a subtle but telling shift in priority. Beyond the energy sector, Canada has successfully positioned itself as a competitive supplier across manufacturing, aerospace, and technology. Canadian aerospace manufacturers have secured contracts previously dominated by American firms, while Canadian technology companies have established European operations at an unprecedented rate. The results speak volumes. Canada-EU trade has expanded by approximately 2/3 under CETA, reaching $119 billion annually, with substantial room for further growth. The strategic trade chessboard has fundamentally shifted, with Canada's economic maneuvers leaving Washington with increasingly limited countermoves. The United States now confronts a paradox. The very economic leverage tactics that secured American trade dominance for decades may now be precisely what undermines it. Washington's recent decision to double tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50% demonstrates its willingness to apply significant economic pressure against its northern neighbor. Yet this aggressive posture may be backfiring in ways American trade strategists failed to anticipate. For generations, the United States has operated as the economic centerpiece within NATO, wielding its position as the alliance's principal supplier to extract geopolitical concessions and maintain influence. This economic primacy was long considered an immutable fact of transatlantic relations. However, as Canadian trade initiatives gain momentum throughout Europe, American policymakers face a strategic dilemma with no clear resolution path. They can either attempt to incentivize European businesses to maintain American supply chains, contradicting their recent preference for tariffs and restrictions, or they can apply direct pressure on Canada to curb its European ambitions. The Biden administration's choice thus far appears to favor the pressure approach. Beyond doubling metal tariffs, this strategy signals Washington's determination to maintain its traditional economic hierarchy within the alliance. Canada, however, has responded with equal resolve. Ontario's suspension of a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the United States demonstrates Canada's readiness for prolonged economic confrontation rather than capitulation to American demands. This escalating tension creates a self-reinforcing cycle that further validates Canada's diversification strategy. Each punitive American measure provides additional evidence for Canada's argument to European partners about the necessity of reducing dependence on unpredictable American supply chains. Trade analysts increasingly suggest that American leaders have fundamentally miscalculated Canada's determination to establish itself as a serious trade alternative rather than continuing as a subordinate economic partner. European businesses are observing this dynamic with calculated interest. They recognize that Canadian partnerships offer a strategic middle ground, supply chain diversification without complete severance from American markets. This balanced approach to risk management allows European firms to maintain necessary access to American markets while simultaneously reducing vulnerability to Washington's economic pressure tactics. The dilemma facing American policymakers is increasingly apparent. They can either offer more attractive incentives to keep European businesses engaged with American suppliers or continue applying pressure on Canada. Both approaches carry substantial risk of accelerating rather than preventing the ongoing trade realignment, particularly if heavy-handed tactics further alienate European allies and drive them toward Canadian alternatives. History offers valuable context for what we're witnessing between Canada, the US, and NATO allies. Similar economic power shifts occurred in the post-World War II era, when European nations strategically reduced their dependence on American economic dominance. Those shifts weren't merely temporary adjustments, but fundamental realignments that permanently altered trade relationships across the Atlantic. What we're seeing today represents a structural transformation in NATO's economic architecture, rather than a fleeting reaction to current policies. The sustainability of this shift will depend on several key indicators: the stability of newly formed trade agreements, European businesses' willingness to permanently reconfigure supply chains, and Washington's ultimate response to Canada's expanding influence. This realignment transcends traditional economic competition. It reflects a new geopolitical reality where diversification of trade partnerships has become essential for national security. The coming months will reveal whether Washington can adapt to this new paradigm by recognizing Canada as a legitimate economic competitor deserving strategic accommodation, rather than attempting to preserve an outdated hierarchical relationship that no longer reflects economic realities.